Hello, Sangha. Welcome. My name is Venerable Tarpa. Welcome back to our Sunday teachings. Today's topic, we're going to be exploring uh, by request the topics of Buddhist titles, hierarchy, and masters. So, a dear friend of mine came to me and said, I am having trouble understanding all these different things in Buddhism. There's so many titles, there's so much hierarchy and positions, there's so many different masters that are said to do so many things. Can you add some clarity to it? And I said, you know what? I think I can. I really think I can shed a little light on it. So it's going to be an informal teaching. I did a little bit of prep, but generally I'm just going to be working off the top of my head. Another thing about it is that I was originally planning to just cover a little bit of the various Buddhisms around the world. And then it occurred to me, uh, first thing this morning, that it was far too big of a topic to cover and that I would probably do it all poorly. So what I wanted to do was isolate it and bring it down to the Buddhism that SBT is based on and the Buddhism that SBT follows. So SBT primarily is based on the Tibetan Buddhist tradition and the Theravada tradition. I think it's safe to say that that's home. Now, that doesn't mean all of our members feel that way. With SBT, everybody's welcome. So we have a lot of Sangha members that are coming from the Zen tradition, the Chan tradition, and that's absolutely fine. I chose the Tibetan and Theravada traditions when I started SBT, just because that's my education. I'm a monk that was ordained by the Dalai Lama in the Tibetan tradition, so that was my education. Those are the practices I was used to. And then secular Buddhism generally is really focused on the earliest of the Buddhist teachings, the Nikayas, which are embedded in the early Pali Canon of Theravada. So that's why we do that. So if you're interested in more information about Zen and different things, I did put together a short worksheet that I'll make available to everybody after the class, which covers a little bit more of the other traditions. But today I'm just going to cover those main two. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to start with just a little bit of an overview of Buddhism to kind of explain and bring some clarity to what the different traditions are that we're going to be sharing and how they all got to be. Okay, there's our thing. This is from my text, Tibetan Buddhist Essentials. And so for those that are new to Buddhism, might not know these. So basically the traditions, the main traditions of Buddhism, Buddhism starts in the Buddha's day and then shortly after his passing, a few hundred years after his passing, Buddhism is recognized as the Nikaya school. It was labeled for a while the Hinayana tradition, but it's more appropriate to call it the Nikaya tradition. The Nikayas, it's the title for the earliest Buddhist sutras. And so that's at the time of the Buddha, or near that here, the death of the Buddha. Now, these times are according to Tibetan presentation of Buddhism. Many secular Buddhists believe the Buddha existed a bit later in time, but no one knows. So we'll just use this. So the Nikayas, the early Buddhism, are right there around the death of the Buddha and shortly after. Now later on, and they have the first council here, which establishes Buddhism. And then at 250 BCE, King Ashoka takes the Nikaya traditions, which at this point had split apart because of different ideas about Buddhism. It split apart into 18 different schools of Nikaya Buddhism. And King Ashoka wanted to bring the schools back together and create a text that kind of embodied all of the Buddhist teachings. So at 250 BCE, King Ashoka, the great compassionate Indian king, he has a council, the third council, and he brings these schools together, and they come up with a condensed version of it all, an established, excellent document that they believe encompasses the Buddhist teachings. And they send that, let alone do they establish it in India, they send it out to the world. And most importantly, they send it to Sri Lanka. King Ashoka's son and daughter are the ones that take it to Sri Lanka. Through Sri Lanka, sometime after, that's where the Theravada tradition begins. So Nikaya is our first tradition of Buddhism. Theravada is our second. And then the Mahayana school appears shortly after that, at about the 1st century. And then the Mahayana grows in India and then expands out to the world. So in Sri Lanka, supposedly the Mahayana tradition doesn't go there. It remains Theravada, and that's where that's formed, and they spread throughout South Asia. So when we think about the Nikayas, we think about Indian Buddhism, early Indian Buddhism. When we think about Theravada, we're thinking about South Indian Buddhism. And it's originally it started in Sri Lanka, and this is Thailand and Malaysia, and Burma, Laos, Cambodia, South Asia. And then the Mahayana school comes out 1st century. For those that are frantically writing notes, as I can see, I'm going to supply the class notes in a document when I'm done. So you might not have to write everything I say down. So then the Mahayana school emerges in India, 1st century, either 1st century BCE or 1st century, probably 1st century BCE. And then Mahayana becomes the prominent Buddhism in India, and especially through the school of Nalanda, the great Indian Buddhist University of Nalanda, where all the great Mahayana masters come from. From there, it starts to spread around the world, and it first spreads to China, as you can see on the chart, then moves to Korea, Japan, and those are the beginnings of Chan, Zen, and Song Buddhism, which are really supposedly 3 different terms that mean Zen, right? It's basically the same school. Later, 650 CE, and Buddhism is brought to Tibet. And this is a later Mahayana a presentation, tradition of Buddhism that was not shared in the East. So it makes Tibetan Buddhism very unique. Tibetan Buddhism is the only Buddhism that embodies the later Mahayana teachings of India and the work and presentation of the University of Nalanda. So that's supposedly the only place in the world that it was preserved after Buddhism declined in India. And then a lot of people find it interesting that Buddhism actually goes to Thailand quite late, because we think of Thailand as being such a central country in Buddhism. So this gives you a little bit of an idea about that. One last thing, as Buddhism, the Mahayana traveled to Tibet, in India, the Mahayana tradition slowly turns into the Vajrayana tradition, the application of Tantra. So Tantric Buddhism existed in Nalanda. It was the main focus, I think it's safe to say. And then that's another aspect of Buddhism that's preserved in Tibet and nowhere else. Though there are pockets of Tantric practitioners around the world, there were some in Japan, there's some in South Asia. Okay, fascinating stuff, right? Any questions about that? Pretty straightforward. Okay, so I wanted to set it up like that for you. So now what I'd like to do is just get at it. And I thought, Dana, please share with me. You're muted, friend. You need some help? You're still muted. I'll help you.
Hey, so my question is about the decline in India of the Buddhism and what replaced it.
So, boys, it's such a mystery. There's so many different views of why Buddhism declined, and yet Hinduism and Jainism didn't. According to history, the Muslim Turks came down and invaded India. India was invaded a lot, but at this point, they were particularly vicious towards the Buddhists and murdering all the monks in all the monasteries. So there's many different thoughts. I don't think I've ever heard any one that made any sense, because some would say, well, maybe they persecuted the Buddhists because Buddhists don't believe in God, but neither do the Jains. Maybe they didn't persecute the Jains because the Jains were a small group in India. Some hypothesize that other religions in India got the Turks to persecute their enemies. So I'm afraid I just don't have the answer to that.
But
But it was a real tragic event.
But Hinduism was in India before Buddhism, right?
Brahmanism was, which is the
Oh,
precursor to Hinduism.
okay.
It's fairly safe to say the same. And also always keep in mind that Hinduism isn't a single religion, but a family of religions. In the West, we just kind of deem it all Hinduism, but it really is a family of quite different presentations. Yeah, but that's one for the history books. I've never, in my book, Tibetan Buddhist Essentials, I have some of the views there if you'd like to follow up on that. Thanks for asking. So I thought now what I do is, how about we just run through some of the hierarchy, and I want to make today's class light, hopefully short, and feel free to participate in whatever aspect you want. And we'll kind of cover this. So one of the things about the hierarchy in Buddhism, it is fairly standardized through all Buddhist schools, meaning most Buddhist traditions follow the same basic outline of what lay and monastics do. And of course, this all comes back and can be found in the Tripitaka, the Buddha's, the three baskets. In the first basket, which is called Vinaya, and Vinaya is full of all the rules and disciplines and training of monastics, but also lay as well. And so in all the traditions, we have male and female lay practitioners. So to go back to the beginning, according to the Buddha, there's four types of Buddhist practitioner. There's lay, and lay means not monk or not nun, regular folks, right? So that's what a lay person is. So the Buddha says there's four types. There's lay female, lay male, then there's monastic female and monastic male. Those are the four types of practitioners in the Buddha's day. And the Buddha insists they're all equal. This is very important because that gets thrown out the window pretty early on in Buddhism. As soon as the Buddha passes away, that starts to change. So let's look at monasticism. This is generally true among all the schools. Well, firstly, as my notes tell me, sadly, gender discrimination against women is found in all Buddhist traditions throughout its long history and is strongly present in its monastic hierarchy. However, this is changing. Now, there is an argument to be made. Is it cultural? Of course, we're talking about in the history of Buddhism, we're talking about Asia. So is this a cultural Asian phenomena, or did it have to do with Buddhism itself? I'm leaning more towards cultural. So And it's sad, even today, in my travels throughout all the Buddhist countries, in all the traditions, the amount of discrimination against women was just heartbreaking. A couple of examples. In Thailand, a lot of the traditions will do this. They'll claim that a tradition of of nuns, of the process of making nuns, the lineage had somehow been broken, right? The ceremony, which can only be carried out by four nuns to create more nuns, somehow had been broken, and they don't have the adequate fully ordained nuns to make more, so they disqualify the lineage. So especially in Thailand, there really is no monastic path for women of any kind. In the Tibetan tradition, there's no place for women or nuns in a senior position. There's no fully ordained nun. But in Thailand, there's just no nuns at all. And so what dedicated, wonderful practitioners in Thailand have done, these women, they created their own sangha. And though they're not officially recognized, they wear pink. And they've made their own sangha. And they're exceptional practitioners. So, but sadly, this gender discrimination continues. In SBT, we just completely pulled the rug on it, where we don't even use the terms monk and nun. We just call everyone a monastic. Everyone is completely equal in every way. Of course, everything has to be that way. Nevertheless, that's often seen. So I want to start at the beginning from lay and work my way up. So from a lay position, people can become a renunciant. And so they call it anagarika in Theravada. They call it rabjong in Tibetan Buddhism. And so it's someone who's not yet a novice monk or nun, but they're permitted to start training and to live in the nunnery. They're allowed to shave their head, they're allowed to wear robes, but they have yet to take proper monastic vows. Oftentimes, this is given to children who can't quite grasp the vows. From that point, we move to a novice monk or novice nun, and these are monks and nuns as apprentice, and they're in training. And in most traditions, you can't tell the difference visually between the two, but they're in training. And then after that, we have fully ordained monks and nuns. And there's various names for this, but they all kind of mean the same thing. In Pali, it's bhikkhu or bhikkhuni. In Sanskrit, bhikshu or bhikshuni. And in Tibetan, gelong or gelongma. And they all mean basically the same thing. One worthy of veneration, or venerable beggar, right? Isn't that a funny term, venerable beggar? And that's where the term venerable comes from, which we use for a title in the West. I use the title venerable. If you were in Thailand, they might call you a Bhante or bhikshu. So there's different things, but one worthy of veneration. A very pretty title. But yeah, virtuous beggars. That's the expression. Isn't that something? And then and fully ordained monk and fully ordained nun are a bit different. They put more precepts for the nuns. They have to hold additional, I think it's 8 additional precepts. Not in the Tibetan tradition, but in the Theravada tradition. In the Tibetan tradition, again, they don't allow gelongmas. They believe that lineage has been broken. The Dalai Lama keeps saying that he's going to bring it back. And of course, as I mentioned, in Theravada tradition, none of these are available to women anymore. In the Mahayana, they are. So a lot of nuns in the Tibetan tradition or others will take full ordination in the Chan tradition of Chinese Mahayana Buddhism. They're one of the few traditions that still have this fully ordained position for nuns. They'll ordain through that and then practice the tradition they wish for. From there, we have senior monastics. Now, this is really only recognized in the Theravada, but once you've been a monk for 10 years, they use the term Terabanti. So Banti is a polite word for monk in Pali. So then you have Terabanti. And once somebody's a Terabanti, they're a senior monastic, and they can do things like they can participate in ceremonies to make other monks. They can do more blessing activities. They're able to do secret ceremonies, things like that. And then after 20 years, they become Mahaterabanti. Maha means great, like in Mahayana. So the Mahaterabanti. I just completed 16 years as a monastic this month, last month. And so I've been a senior monk for quite a while. And then the leader of a monastery or nunnery, they use the English terms abbot and abbess, or Mahatera or Sanghayaka. Sanghanayaka, I'm not familiar with that term. So those are general, and those apply to the various Buddhist traditions. Now in Theravada, there's a couple other titles or hierarchy. Of course, why don't we just start with the first one, that was the Buddha, right? We all have these different traditions, but guess what? They all have the same teacher, the Buddha. And we define a Buddha as an awakened one who's purified all defilements and thereby achieved Buddhahood. Buddhists believe in many Buddhas, 7, 28, or millions. So 7 is there's supposedly 7 Buddhas in our eon, 28 in all eons, and the Mahayana believe there's millions of Buddhas right now. So the historical Buddha of our age is Shakyamuni Buddha, and he's considered the 4th of 7 Buddhas of this eon, and he was born Siddhartha Gautama of the Sakya clan. So in the Theravada, the highest attainment under a Buddha is called an Arahat, or Arhat in Sanskrit. And it's one who's worthy of veneration. There again is that title. And it's the highest of enlightenment beings in Theravada, but not yet a Buddha. They say the word, even though the Buddha is an Arhat, according to Theravada, they saved the word Buddha for this very special Arhat. And they call him a wheel-turning Buddha. Only certain Buddhas are able to come upon the teachings on their own. So Buddhism had died out completely in the universe, and then a wheel-turning Buddha comes along, and somehow he's able to experience those original teachings and then teach them to the world. It's a very special Buddha. Not all Buddhas are wheel-turning Buddhas. And so Shakyamuni Buddha was one of them. And he's able to reignite Buddhism, because according to Buddhists, that Buddhism is this what's the word I want to use? Is this cyclical teaching that's always been in the universe. It comes and it goes, but it's always there. And the reason being is because it represents the true nature of reality. Buddhism isn't creating something. It's merely observing, witnessing, and explaining the nature of reality, according to Buddhists. And then in Theravada, you also have the term ajam, which is in Pali, and that's a high Dharma teacher. Maybe you've heard of Ajam Cha, Ajam Brahm. There's a lot of ajams. Okay, I started with Theravada because it was a lot easier. When you get into Tibetan Buddhism, man, do they like their titles and their positions and their hats. They love hats. Tibetans love a good hats. That's one thing, SBT, we don't have any hats. Cover up our bald heads, right? We should get karma on that to design us some cool hats. Okay, in Tibetan Buddhism and Mahayana in general, the highest practitioner is a bodhisattva. Again, similar to the arhat. The arhat's the highest position in Theravada, highest attainment. The Mahayana believe the bodhisattva is a step further and one step away from a Buddha. Technically, they talk about a bodhisattva, or they'd say a supreme bodhisattva is going to be a Buddha in their next lifetime, and nothing can stop that. Highest practitioners, better. Then we have the word Lama. Different people define Lama differently. I like my presentation. A Lama is different than a teacher. A Lama is a tantric teacher, a spiritual guide or teacher, often a monastic or a recognized master authorized to guide others in practice. And yeah, that should say tantric practice, and it should say tantric teacher. That's my belief. And a tantric guy, spiritual, let's say tantric guy. Here's the reason why, is that you're not supposed, depending on the school, because every school's different, you're not supposed to be able to call yourself Lama until you've gone through your 3-year tantric retreat. So at the end of your practice and your schooling, you go into retreat for 3 years, 3 months, 3 weeks. After doing that and actually taking what you've studied, put it into practice, and hopefully gain some realization of it, you're then considered a Lama. I've never done my 3-year retreat because I decided that I wasn't going to be a tantric practitioner. And so I cannot call myself a Lama. I'm just a monk, and I'm happy with that. Then we have the idea of root Lama. A root Lama is a main teacher. And it says here, most often tantric. And it should say a main tantric teacher because there is no other. So, and when now it's very strict relationship with your master. You're supposed to study your Lama for up to 11 years to make sure they're the right one, they're the real deal, before you choose them as your root Lama. Once you choose them as a root Lama, you have to do everything they say. There's a vow about it. And it's because it's your training. So unless it really goes against virtue and wholesome behavior. At some point you choose your root Lama. A lot of traditions like the Gelug tradition that I belong to, they put far less emphasis on root Lama. I had various teachers throughout my education. Then we have the beautiful term Rinpoche, which means precious one. And this is bestowed upon highly respected teachers, especially tokus. And so tokus here, a recognized reincarnation reincarnation isn't really the right term. It should be reborn. I'll leave it because the word reborn sounds funny. There's a distinction that's made between rebirth and reincarnation. Reincarnation, supposedly, it's you with your personality, your identity, your self that's being reborn. In Buddhism, we believe the self passes away at death, and what's reborn is simply the energy, the subtle mind. I often say the momentum or flavor of our lives, but it's not us that's reborn. It's just our life force, you could say. Nevertheless, tokus are recognized masters that their students have tracked them down as children, and they're sure that, oh, this is the reborn version of my past teacher. This is only in Tibetan Buddhism. And they make quite a spectacle of it, of of tracking down these people and their stories that the children can pick out objects that belong to them in a prior life. There's a lot of modern controversy around that. The Dalai Lama himself, at a teaching that I was present for, mentioned that he didn't believe that most of the tokus were legitimate. It turned quickly into a political thing where, any big donor or important people, it just seemed like all their children just magically saw as tokus. So it really became a political thing for power. Nevertheless, it's a very unique thing in Tibetan Buddhism. Many Westerners believe that Rinpoches are naturally tokus, and the two terms are different. Toku is specifically for a recognized rebirth of a prior master. Rinpoche, that title can be given to people that aren't tokus. And again, just precious one, but it is for a very, very high teacher. They don't throw around the word Rinpoche often. Then we have the word Kempo. And we're not talking about Tenzin Kempo in our group. That's a name, this is a title. Kempo is usually a scholarly degree. And Kempo is used primarily in the Nyingme Kaju tradition schools. And it's just a very, very high level where oftentimes abbots are given to, but it means master of teachings, master of practice. So it's really, really a high level. Dana, please share with me. You're muted once again. I'll help you.
Who has the authority to name some a Rinpoche or a Kenpo?
There are somewhat guidelines for things, but other great masters. Every student in any aspect is always recognized by their teacher or by higher teachers who can see that they've reached a certain level, right?
Yeah. Does the Dalai Lama believe he's a rebirth?
Oh, that's a great question. So, at another teaching, in his own words, he said, I don't believe I'm the reincarnation of the last Lama, though I do believe I have a strong karmic connection. And all the Westerners in the audience, our jaws dropped. And when I asked my Tibetan friends about it, they all said, oh, he's just being humble. They all just said, oh, he didn't mean it. He's just being humble. Of course he is. So, yeah. I often say one of the reasons I'm a secular Buddhist is because I spent, 12 years, 13 years chasing stories. All these stories, and I chased them all over Asia. As you all know, I've been through the Himalayas a half dozen times on both sides. I've been to Tibet 3-4 times, and I've looked for all these stories, and I found I found them to be interesting. I'm agnostic about them. Maybe they're true, maybe they're not. I just like to focus on what seems to awaken me. So yeah, there's a lot of great stories in all the traditions. The Theravada like to paint the Mahayana as being really out there and religious and all these supernatural stories, but the Theravada have their own. It's loaded with all kinds of supernatural stories. So and I can't say they're not true. I can just say that I tend not to focus on those. Then we have a title of Lapan, and this is not widely known, but again, the Nyingma Kaju have this title, and it means teacher, oftentimes a tantric teacher. Now, Geshe is one I'm familiar with. Geshe is an academic degree of the Gelug school, which is my brand of school. In Serije Monastery, which I attended, Geshe was the highest degree. It's equivalent to a doctorate in Buddhist philosophy, taking monks who, of course, start young, but it takes them up to 23 years to get a Geshe degree. Most Westerners don't, of course, aren't young enough to start that. Most Westerners at Sarah would do 10 years of study, which would bring us up through the middle way philosophy class, UMA, and then that would be considered sufficient to go back and start teaching. So yeah, it's an academic degree. So one of the things I like about the Gelug school and its founder, Tsongkhapa, when he passed away, he didn't want a toku system running the Gelug school. The other schools are always looking for the reincarnation of the past teacher to take over the school. But Tsongkhapa didn't. Tsongkhapa wanted the best student, the best scholar to run the Gelug school. So Tsongkhapa implemented a different system. It's called the Gaiden Tippa. And it's the best person for the job kind of a thing. They don't have to be reincarnated lamas. So it's a bit more of a rational school, I think. Nevertheless, that's the whole thing of the Geshe. So a yogi is a little different. Yogi is a tantric practitioner, but not a monk or nun, right? Non-monastic. Usually you think of yogis living in caves like the famous Milarepa and others, living in caves, practicing on their own, living pretty bizarre lives. There's a lot of bizarre stories of the strange things they would do. But and then you have yoga. So yogis is the plural. Yogi, male, yogini, female. There are some impressive yoginis in the world. So we often think of the man on the mountaintop that people are climbing up to see, but there's a huge tradition of powerful female tantric practitioners. Another way for women to get out from under the oppression of monasticism was to be a tantric practitioner. They didn't have to become nuns. Nobody could hold them from that. They could just go directly to powerful practices. But then we have the householder yogi, the Nagpa. And my first teacher was a Nagpa, and they're powerful practitioners. But they'll usually spend some time in a cave doing their practice. My teacher spent, Lama Tarcham, he spent 7 years in a cave meditating. And then when they have a certain level of realization, they come back to the community, and then they live out their lives, often as farmers. And they're not monks, so they're not celibate. They'll have a wife or a few wives, and they'll have children. And they believe that the challenges of lay life, including wives and children, or husbands if you're a female, it actually adds fuel for awakening. So that's the yogi. They'll dress like monks, but they'll always have a little white on. The robes are red and white symbolizing lay practitioner. And then you might not have heard of this term, a siddha or a mahasiddha. A mahasiddha actually means great adept, but it's a highly realized tantric master. Usually they're people that possess magical spiritual powers through their tantric practice. Hey, pretty cool. Any questions? Yeah, Miss Wamo.
I have two questions. So my first question is, so is the Dalai Lama considered the head of only Tibetan Buddhism and not Theravada?
So the Dalai Lama is not the head of any tradition.
Okay.
The Gelug school, which the Dalai Lama is a member of, is run by the Gaiden Tippa. The Dalai Lama is the spiritual leader of Tibet. And you could think about him as being a Dharma king. He's like the king of Tibet.
Okay.
Supposedly he has reigned over all the traditions. But traditionally this isn't so. There was a lot of oppression of different schools. And the Gelugpa, being proud and thinking they're better and more sophisticated and better scholars than everybody else, have quite a history of oppression of the other traditions, especially the Nyingma school. So it wasn't always pretty. But the Dalai Lama made a huge effort to stop that, bring them all together. He studied from all the different traditions individually. So that's the answer. He's not a member, he's not the leader of a tradition, but all of Tibetan Buddhism. Your
Okay,
second
and then
question?
why is it that there's some Rinpoches that are married?
Well, remember that Rinpoche just means precious one.
They're
So
not
you don't
monks,
have to be a monastic to be a Rinpoche.
though? Oh,
You could be a
okay.
yogi.
Okay.
And so when people get confused about Tibetan masters being married, how can they be married? The fact is that most of those married people aren't monastics at all, but they're yogis or householder yogis.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Dana, please.
Are there siddhas today, and have you met any? Wasn't
Um,
Arjuna, wasn't he a siddha?
There's stories of them. You don't hear the term very often because it's really applied to someone who possesses these spiritual powers. So I think most of they're in tall tales. Do they exist? Probably somewhere in mountaintop caves. At least that's where my imagination takes me. So no, I've never met a Mahasiddha, though I think you're the closest I've come to so far. David.
Could you say a little bit more about what tantric means?
Sure. So Tantric Buddhism is a method of using magic to reach Buddhahood. So as Buddhism progresses, you have the Nikaya Buddhism, which is the most straightforward. The Theravada comes later, and the Theravada gets a little bit more away from that grounded Nikayas. They get quite a bit of supernatural stuff that comes in. Mahayana take it to the next level. Buddhism becomes quite religious and quite supernatural. Tantric takes it to a further level yet. The history of Tantra, currently people believe that the Tantra actually comes from Vedanta or Hinduism and from the Shivite tradition. And so in one of the famous portrayals of the rise of Tantra was that in Buddhism, in India, Buddhism was quite celebrated at a certain time. Buddhism starts to die away as Tantra, Hindu Tantra, starts to become the rage of India. All the kings and all the sponsors are really getting into, spooky tantric practice, and supposedly it's taking all the sponsorship, which a lot of times was from the kings themselves, from Buddhism. Then it appears that the other traditions to survive had to incorporate Tantra. I believe Jainism began it first, and then Buddhism started to incorporate it. Now, with that said, Buddhist Tantra really did create something unique in the world, though it's based on this earlier Shivite style of practice. They really mix the two together and create something quite amazing. I don't mean to disparage Tantra here. Some of these questions are hard to answer because there's my own personal view, and a lot of the support for these views isn't very formalized either. So I just want to add the caveat that I chose not to practice Tantra, but I don't deny that it's an incredibly powerful system of practice, but it's an incredibly complex one. And for me, to put that kind of effort in and not necessarily knowing what I was going to get out of it wasn't appealing to me. So, but I don't mean to disparage it in any way. It is quite amazing. I've met some amazing practitioners that practiced it. Is that helpful?
Thank you, Tarpa. Yes.
But that's kind of a coarse or a gross definition to say, oh, tantric is application of magic to become a Buddha. And I agree. I just kind of throw that out there, but I can't say that it's not true. There is just a huge, I practiced quite a bit of Tantra before I decided not to. I have empowerments in all the highest tantric practices in my traditions. So I have my own experience in it, and I decided not to practice it. I didn't have confidence that it was going to deliver what it promised. Hey, we got a little bit more time. How about we jump through to some masters? How's our teaching going, Wangmo? Are you getting, is it everything you hoped for? Good. Okay. I hope it's interesting. So let's go through this kind of quickly. So we have the original Buddhist masters. This is just some of them. I'm just throwing them out there. We have the great Shariputra and we have Moggallana. These are the two chief disciples of the Buddha. Sariputra is known for his wisdom. Moggallana is a Mahasiddha, right? He's known for his supernatural powers. And what a nice balance between the two. At some point, the Buddha outlives them. At some point, they both pass away. And the Buddha just talked about how empty the Sangha felt without them. He really, it's obvious his heart was broken when they left. Then we have the great Venerable Ananda. This is the Buddha's cousin, but more importantly, his personal attendant throughout his life, the person that was there when the Buddha passed. And he was known for an idyllic memory. People went to him for what the Buddha said in the sutras. He seemed to memorize all the sutras, word for word. At that point, they would be teachings, right? And then we have Venerable Kassapa, who's a unique figure in Buddhism. He's a leader of the first Buddhist council. Now, there's much to say about him, both pro and against, pro and for. I think Stephen Batchelor paints a really interesting picture of him through his research. The Kassapa is like when the Buddha dies, Ananda, the Buddha, of course, says, they ask him, who's going to run the Sangha when you pass? And the Buddha says, no one. I'm not appointing anyone in charge. My teachings will be your guide. The Buddha leaves it at that. The Buddha passes away, but the Sangha does want to continue. And of course, they want leadership. I think most of everyone looks to Ananda to run the Sangha. But oddly, Kassapa kind of jumps in there. He's not that known, but I think has a lot of bravado, and he jumps in, starts taking charge of things. And he starts to really condemn Ananda for all his problems, especially that Ananda had the idea of bringing women into the Sangha, of making nuns, and how terribly that has worked out. That it was probably due to that the Buddha passed away. And also Kassapa blames him for when the Buddha was passing. The Buddha said, for monastics, you can do away with all the secondary vows. Don't worry about all those vows, just do the main ones. But Ananda, they blame him for not asking specifically what those secondary vows are. And then they say, because of that, we're going to have to just continue to follow all of them. Right? Great logic. So they really beat up on Ananda, and they steal the Sangha away from him. He steals the Sangha away from him. Now that's kind of the negative approach to it. And it's also, many people say that this is the really religious turn of the Sangha when Kassapa comes in. He brings in, he's accused of bringing in a lot of religious culture into Buddhism that wasn't present in the earlier Nikayas. So whatever you think of him, he's either savior or a devil. We don't know. Okay, so historically, in the Theravada tradition, you have the great Buddhaghosa. This is the great writer of the commentaries of the Theravada tradition, legendary 5th century. Then you have Dharmapala, which follows up on his coattails and again writes many of the brilliant commentaries on in the Theravada tradition. More contemporaries that you might know is Ajahn Chah from Thailand. I spent some time in his monastery in Ubon, Thailand. Ajahn Chah's disciples or students are the founders of the new mindfulness movement in America. All of those guys of Zen and Cornfield and all those modern teachers, they're all students of Ajahn Chah. So he made a huge impact on the West, though he didn't speak English. Then we have Essen Goenka, who's the founder of the Vipassana meditation centers worldwide, famous for their free 10-day meditation programs. We've talked about that as well. Then we have Bhikkhu Bodhi, who is probably, I consider him to be the great Theravada scholar. Anytime I need a distinct answer, I always go to Bhikkhu Bodhi. Nearly idyllic memory, just brilliant. He's an American, and he studied, I think, in Sri Lanka for most of his things. Then we have Ajahn Brahm, which is an English-born Theravada monk who now has a monastery in Australia. He's a favorite in the world. He's really funny. And Ajahn Sumedho is one of my favorites, an American senior monk in the Thai forest tradition. He's in, what is it called, Amarati Monastery in England. And I don't know if he's passed away or not. He's very old, but just absolutely brilliant. If you can watch some of his YouTube videos, it would be a wonderful thing. I get most of my Theravada information from him and Bhikkhu Bodhi. Okay, then we have the Mahayana masters. We have Nagarjuna, who was now these Mahayana masters all come from Nalanda University, the big, beautiful Buddhist university. Nagarjuna, the 2nd, 3rd century, and he's credited as the founder of the Madhyamaka middle way school. Some people say he's the founder of the Mahayana school completely, and a story about him diving into the ocean, swimming down to the bottom, getting the teachings from the Naga king himself before surfacing and bringing the teachings to human beings. The Nagas are fish snake people that exist in the world. Then we have Shantideva, which is very popular. Shantideva is another 8th centuries from Nalanda, Indian Buddhist master. I think that might be a mistake. I vaguely remember Shantideva maybe being from Afghanistan. But I could be wrong. And he's known for his teachings on compassion, wisdom, and his work on the Bodhisattva path. In my opinion, Shantideva is solely responsible for the compassionate, warm, colorful style of Tibetan Buddhism. Shantideva never went to Tibet, but his teachings were taken there. Shantideva's work never spread to other parts of the world. Shantideva's work never went east to influence Chan or Zen Buddhism. In fact, Buddhism that went east, they didn't get later Buddhism. They had some pilgrims from China that visited, but Mahayana, a lot of the later masters, like of Nalanda, a lot of that work never found its way to the east until recently. But so Shantideva's work solely influenced Tibetan Buddhism, and it is just beautiful, beautiful work on compassion and loving kindness. And so there was 12 Nalanda masters that are super famous, and the Dalai Lama often says the Buddhism of Tibetan Buddhism is the Buddhism of Nalanda. It is later Buddhism of India. It's what Tibetan Buddhism is, but it is mixed with the indigenous religion of Bön, the Bön religion of Tibet. That influenced it as well. And of course, every time Buddhism spreads, it's influenced by its culture and by its indigenous religions. And then we have Bodhidharma, who is an Indian Buddhist master. He's accredited for bringing Buddhism east to China, and he's legendary. So he brings Buddhism to China, and And so in China, Bodhidharma's work is called Chan Buddhism. But supposedly the word Chan, the word Zen, and the word Song, which is Korean Buddhism, are just different pronunciations for that same term. And he's legendary. You just read books and books about Bodhidharma. Oh, we got Tibetan masters. So we have Padmasambhava, who again, he'd be a Mahasiddha as well. They call him Guru Rinpoche in Tibet. He's seen as the second Buddha. He eclipses the Buddha in many traditions. When I was in the Nyingma school, you rarely saw a Buddha statue. It was always a Padmasambhava statue. And he was accredited for being one of the first people to truly establish Nalanda Buddhism in Tibet. Buddhism had priorly come to Tibet from other places like China. Then we have the great teacher Atisha. Atisha, again, Nalanda master. Most of these Nalanda masters that brought Buddhism to Tibet were abbots. They were very high practitioners. Atisha is credited for revitalizing Buddhism, but specifically monasticism in Tibet. So the story goes is that when Atisha arrives in Tibet, monasticism has just about disappeared. It's just a practice of yogis. And so Atisha, in his own idea, he's rejuvenizing, purifying Buddhism in Tibet. He believes that it's strayed away from a genuine Buddhism, and he comes back. He's a huge, huge figure in Tibetan Buddhism. Milarepa, again, would be a Mahasiddha. He's one of the most famous yogis, and he comes from the Kagyu tradition. Je Tsongkhapa is from my tradition, the Gelug. He's the founder of it. He's renowned both as a great practitioner and a great scholar. In my opinion, it's clear he's Tibetan Buddhist greatest philosopher, Tibetan Buddhist greatest Buddhist philosopher. And then, we have Longchen Rabjong, which is from the Nyingma school. The Nyingma school doesn't have a single person that's in charge, but he's a classic figure. And then contemporary, we have the Dalai Lama right now. And we talked about reincarnation and tokus. The Dalai Lama isn't a name, it's a title, right? The Dalai Lama's name is Tenzin. Why have I blacked out on the Dalai Lama's name? Tenzin Gyatso. Dalai Lama is a title, and so he's the 14th of the Dalai Lamas, right? Now, the same way that works, and each time a Dalai Lama passes away, a new one is found to continue their work. You also have these tokus in other traditions, like in the Kagyu, they have the Karmapas. The Karmapas actually predate the Geluks. Some would say that the Karmapa system works so well, the Geluks wanted to get on board and have their own incarnate lamas, their own tokus. But it started with the Karmapas, and to this day, they have Karmapas. As you can see, the current one is the 17th, so they got a couple of years on the Geluks, and they're still tracing that. And also the Sakya do it, and they have the Sakya Tenzin. And then we have popular teachers nowadays like Dzongkar Khyentse Rinpoche. He's in the Nyingma Sakya school, and he's a very popular modern teacher. Mingyur Rinpoche is, of course, all over the place. I could go on and on about modern contemporary teachers. So there's so many great ones. Any questions about all those masters? What do you think? We kind of covered them all. Everything else you can Google. Miss Tashi, please.
So, although we're, the word's gone.
A secular
Do
group?
yes, although we're a secular group, you mentioned that we kind of followed the Tibetan type. And does that include Mahayana?
Yeah, Vajrayana practice or tantric practice is a type of Mahayana practice.
Okay.
So we really have two major forms of Buddhism, two major traditions, the Theravada, because the Nikayas are gone, the Theravada and the Mahayana. And the Vajrayana, often some consider it a third, but I think it's better to say that it's an adaptation of the Mahayana. It's a tantric Mahayana because it's based on the Mahayana. And of course, the Tibetans claim that they're the only Buddhist school to follow all three, what they call vehicles or paths. They follow both because the Theravada, like the Old Testament for Christians, the Theravada is the basis of all of the traditions. Then on top of that, you have the Mahayana teachings. So Mahayanas follow both. And then on top of that, you have the Vajrayana teachings. So Tibetans have all three.
Thank you. That
Miss Wama?
explains, yeah.
Oh, if someone were to ask us what tradition we follow, do we say secular or what tradition do we follow?
Well, currently, secular isn't a tradition. We're hoping to make it one. And usually a tradition is founded when there's essentially four monastics. Doesn't have, being secular, we're not so much rule followers. To be a traditioner is actually officially, there's guidelines. You have to be recognized by the Buddhist Council of, and there's also a thing of a tradition of following lineage, that all traditions have to come from other lineages and you're given permission to do this. And so there's an official way to do it. But as secular Buddhists, we don't feel so committed to those instructions. Where do they come from? Who started them? We're kind of out there in no man's land. So if somebody was to ask me, I'd say I'm a secular Buddhist monk, yeah. And we're hoping, that's why I picked SBT, Secular Buddhist Tradition, because I think there should be.
But so how would we answer that question?
Oh, you'd say I follow secular Buddhism. And then secular Buddhism is open to all forms of Buddhism.
Okay.
So we can follow what aspects of each we like. We're very strongly Theravada. In our case, a lot of the secular Buddhists today is more Zen-based. Stephen Batchelor comes from the Zen tradition, and a lot of other ones. Zen Buddhism can be quite a bit more secular than Tibetan Buddhism, but ours is derived more from the Tibetan side. And but I like to think that we embrace all the traditions, all the best of all the traditions.
Okay.
Oh, I have my choice. How about David?
Where does the Pure Land School fit into this scenario?
Oh, very good. So Pure Land School is a form of Eastern Mahayana Buddhism. And believe it or not, though many people might not have heard it, it's, I think, still the most popular Mahayana Buddhism in the world, mostly in Asia, of course. But it's a form of Mahayana, and I'll let you explore it more from there. You guys can Google it. It's a unique school. To some people, it appears to be quite religious. Their views on heaven and pure lands and how you get there, to a lot of people, they seem reminiscent of Western religion. So I'll let you research that yourselves. Dana?
Is Dzogchen Tantra?
It is. And Dzogchen has its founding with Padmasambhava, the great Mahasiddha who first brings Buddhism to Tibet. As I know you're a Dzogchen practitioner, and you also know that Dzogchen people have a lot of different views on what it is and where it comes from. But simply, if you just look at it next to any other tantric practice, they're identical or nearly identical.
What I've
The
been
Nundro practices are exactly the same in all four traditions, or not exactly, but close enough. You know,
It
yeah, the
doesn't,
goal, yeah.
it doesn't feel magical to me. There's no, you know, anyway, that what I've been exposed to is there's no rituals or, you know, that sort of type of thing.
Well, with Dzogchen, it's a secret practice. A lot of that's going to depend on your depth
Okay.
and what you've been exposed to. But it's there. Yeah. Dzogchen's pretty grounded practice. But if you haven't gone through Nundro, if you haven't gotten to the, then you really have never. It's a secret practice. They don't share it unless you've gone through those
I thought that
before.
was Vajrayana though.
All Vajrayana is secret practice.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but you know, I can practice as Ochen and anybody else can without going through Nangro.
Depending on your teacher.
Oh,
Not doing Nundro, I believe, is a more modern take on it that some teachers do. But traditionally, it was always done through the Nyingma school and always had to do Nundro. I had to do my Nundro.
well, Alan Wallace, anyway, he says no.
A modern teacher, modern presentation.
Right, right.
Yeah. A lot of divergent views of Dzogchen. Oh, Miss Tashi, please.
Just quick. So could we say that we're eclectic Buddhists?
You know, I had a discussion with this the other day with a friend, and we were wondering, and they thought secular Buddhism wasn't a good term for what we do because we're not completely secular. Stephen Batchelor, at first, I think he started with the word, he's the grandfather of secular Buddhism, right? The father. He started with atheist Buddhism, and then he moved to agnostic Buddhism, then settled on secular Buddhism. Now he just calls it Dharma. But I think what we do is probably closest to agnostic Buddhism, because we're not trying to assert something that everybody needs to follow, or we're just opening up Buddhism, right? We share a presentation of Buddhism with everyone, a curriculum that's open, that everyone can get something from. But at the same time, we don't have a specific belief that we're asking anybody in our Sangha to follow. We leave belief to the individual. So in some ways, I would just call ourselves like open Buddhism, right? We're just completely open. And so, but those terms that people don't recognize, the term secular Buddhism is very popular in the world.
That makes sense. Stick with that.
Yeah, for now. I've been meaning to write a piece on it and get some clarity. Dana? Last question, Dana.
No, you just filled me up. I'm full.
Okay, we're running a little behind. I was hoping it was going to be a close, a fast, what am I trying to say? I was hoping it would be a short class, but we had lots of good questions. Hey, let's finish up here. Hey, we got a couple cool things going on. Tomorrow we're beginning our spring mind training program. And mind training is awesome. I often say that it should be called heart training because it's the practice for cultivating the quality of bodhicitta, unconditional love. So anyone can practice this. You don't have to have bodhisattva vows. It's traditionally a bodhisattva practice, but anybody can join in at any level. It's a wonderful practice. It takes very little commitment. Once a week, you're given a topic, and throughout the week, you just ponder it whenever you have a free moment. And each topic is meant to create more loving kindness in you, more friendliness in you. And with very little effort, just by reflecting every now and then on these, they really do change your mind. So they're kind of longer practices, but they're very easy and adaptable practices. You can do them when you're working, when you're doing everything. You don't have to do seated meditation. It's just pondering. When you're waiting in line at the grocery store, you just can ponder the idea. We'll give you the verse on image on your phone, and you could just look at it every now and then. So nevertheless, everybody at every level is welcome to attend. It's going to be tomorrow at this time, 1900 UTC. I'm going to be hosting this program with our dear Wangmo, Tenzin Wangmo. So we couldn't be more thrilled. We're going to be doing 4 mind training programs a year, 2 in the spring, 2 in the fall, each one different. And with the hope, of course, of giving us all this, cultivating this beautiful, loving kindness, this unconditional love for all beings, right? So please join us in that. And other than that, the other event is April 5th, which is just around the corner. We're going to be getting our Introduction to Meditation Level 2 for all those people that have completed Level 1. You don't have to complete Level 1 to join in on Level 2. And if you want to see Level 1, you can watch the videos on YouTube. You can read the text from the website. It's a free 3-week program, our Level 2. And please go to our website and register. So with that said, let's end today's class with our altruistic affirmation. May all be healthy, may all be prosperous, may all be well, may all be present, free of past regret and future worry. May all abide in constant appreciation, which is a source of great joy and contentment. May all realize their true nature and the true nature of reality, which is awakening. Thanks for coming, everybody. Remember that the SBT community was created for one purpose: to support you, the practitioner. See you tomorrow, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much, Venerable Tarpa.
Thank you, Tarpa.